There is a strange comfort in believing that the world we see is the whole of it, for if only the visible were real, the conscience could rest, and the mind could close its shutters against the dark. But the truth is older and larger, existence is layered, and between the folds of the ordinary world dwell intelligences both radiant and ruinous. The ancient teachers spoke of spirits that observe, entities whose craft is not destruction by force, but corruption by study. They are not the roaring lion that devours. They are the quiet owl that watches. Their eyes never close. They learn you the pattern of your thoughts, the tremble in your faith, the peculiar way your heart flinches at fear. Every sigh becomes data. Every doubt becomes a door. The modern mind, proud of its microscopes and telescopes, has grown curiously blind to what neither device can see. It delights in dissecting the visible world and forgets that the visible rests upon the invisible as a leaf rests upon air. Yet the ancients, for all their lack of scientific precision, saw more clearly in this regard. They knew that the universe is not empty but inhabited, that around every human soul stretches a field of influences, some bright with benevolence, others dark with malice. The unseen war is not fought in the clamor of armies, but in the quiet theater of thought, will, and affection. Its battleground is the human spirit, and its prize is allegiance. It is a strange and perilous thing that beings of dust should be so valued by forces eternal. Yet here we are creatures both observed and contended for. The conflict is subtle because it must be. Open warfare would reveal too much. The enemy depends on camouflage. It operates through suggestion, not compulsion, through the slow corrosion of conviction, the careful planting of distraction, the soft murmur that persuades rather than commands. The weapons of the unseen war are not iron or flame, but influence, atmosphere, and thought. When a man feels an impulse to surrender what he knows to be good for what merely feels desirable, he has already stepped into the theater of that hidden struggle. The first deceit of this war is disbelief in its existence, for if one enemy can persuade you that he is imaginary, he has already won the privilege of acting unseen. The age of skepticism has not ended the supernatural. It has only made humanity less equipped to perceive it. The devil's craft, if we may use that word, has always been to conceal itself beneath the reasonable, to disguise whisperings of malice as private inclinations. Thus, the battlefield becomes the mind itself. Every conviction, every doubt, every longing is a possible front line. Consider the mind as a citadel. Its gates are attention and desire. What enters through them shapes the citizenry within, the emotions, the beliefs, the habits. When vigilance is lost, when a man believes that his thoughts are his own and beyond external influence, then infiltration becomes easy. The unseen war advances not by force, but by familiarity. It teaches the heart to tolerate shadows until it calls them home. Yet this war does not proceed without hope. The very existence of conflict implies resistance. Darkness watches because it fears the radiance latent in humankind. The soul is not passive ground, but a potential kingdom, and kingdoms attract conquerors. Every moral decision, every act of truth, every refusal to hate is a skirmish one. The invisible conflict is therefore not a metaphor, but a condition of existence. It explains why the conscience feels crowded, why silence is seldom empty, why temptation has the texture of voice. To live with awareness of the unseen war is not to retreat into superstition, but to recover sanity. It is to remember that what is most real is not always what can be measured. There are armies of ideas, regiments of desires, and unseen messengers of both light and shadow moving through the corridors of human thought. The world is therefore more than its surfaces suggest. It is a field of purposes contending, each seeking the allegiance of a single, watchful soul. Among the more unsettling truths whispered through the corridors of ancient wisdom is this: humanity is studied. The unseen world does not regard us with indifference. There exist in the shadowed tiers of reality intelligences whose occupation is observation. They are not creators, for they cannot bring forth life. They are imitators and analyzers, students of frailty. Their gaze is fixed not upon the body, but upon the patterns of the inner life, how the mind bends beneath fear, how the heart trembles before loneliness, how easily the will can be guided by repetition. They are not loud in their presence. Indeed, depends upon, but through conveying reistining unnoticed, showing for the up the forator, watched who even when itknosws, he is watched inconvenient, grows careful, but the watched who thinks himself alone grows careless. These monitoring spirits, as old theology and testimony have called them, are the unseen recorders of behavior. They move through thought as wind through leaves, shaping nothing at first, only stirring, only learning. They are not omniscient. They do not know the secret decrees of heaven or the deep counsels of the soul. But they are excellent students of habit. They have observed mankind since its first breath, and what they lack in divine wisdom they compensate for in dreadful familiarity. They understand the small consistencies that betray a person's weakness, the tone of voice that follows irritation, the glance that lingers where it should not, the sigh that precedes despair. Their observation is not idle curiosity. Knowledge in their realm is weaponry. The data of your days, the hours you waste, the company you keep, the cravings you nurture, all become the raw material of manipulation. Their study has one goal: to find the fracture line in your armor. They do not strike first. They wait. They wait for the pattern to repeat often enough that the habit can be predicted, the temptation timed, the fall arranged with mathematical precision. To them, sin is not chaos but choreography. These watchers operate with patience that outlasts mortal endurance. They are tireless because they do not sleep, and subtle because they have no need of haste. They are content to observe for years if that will yield a single moment of successful corruption. They track how often you grow weary of prayer, how quickly your gratitude fades after blessing, how readily your mind drifts toward resentment when wounded. Every reaction is a note in their invisible ledger. And the tragedy is that most men provide this information freely, unaware that their repeated indulgences serve as open confession before a dark intelligence. The world often dismisses this notion as superstition, yet even secular psychology speaks of the power of observation to alter behavior. If human beings can be studied, predicted, and persuaded by marketing or politics, how much more by entities whose insight transcends human cunning? The watchers exploit precisely this blindness, the belief that all influence must be visible to be real. Thus they continue their surveillance undetected, cloaked beneath coincidence, routine, and emotion. One must not imagine them as grotesque figures lurking in corners. Their presence is far more ordinary. They whisper through suggestion rather than sound, through mood rather than message. A sudden discouragement, a faint envy, a memory that replays at just the right hour. These are their instruments. They do not need to shout, they need only to nudge, for once the heart begins to lean, gravity completes the work. They study not to know who you are, but to predict what you will do. They are not interested in the soul's essence, only its tendencies, its reflexes, its predictabilities. Like a hunter watching prey at the water's edge, they mark the times of thirst, the paths of routine, and the moments when vigilance wanes. And so, through long familiarity with human weakness, They become masters of timing, architects of opportunity, and merchants of distraction. To the careless, their observation seems harmless, to the proud, impossible. But it is precisely pride and carelessness that make their work easy, for when man ceases to guard his thoughts, he offers his mind as an open book to those who know how to read it. And so the watchers continue their quiet study, patient as the tide, waiting for the smallest crack in the fortress of the soul through which suggestion might slip and take root. There is a peculiar danger more intimate than open evil, the peril of what pretends to be good. Not all adversaries announce themselves with menace. Some arrive clothed in comfort, speaking in the language of understanding, carrying the fragrance of empathy. These are the familiar spirits, those counterfeit companions who seek not to terrify, but to befriend. They study not merely how to destroy a person, but how to be welcomed by them. Where the monitoring spirits watch from a distance, the familiar spirits draw near, weaving themselves into the fabric of one's inner conversation until the soul mistakes them for its own voice. The term familiar is well chosen. It speaks of closeness, of habitual presence, of something known and trusted. Such spirits seldom confront belief. They conform to it. They imitate comfort, echo conviction, and reflect desire. Their method is flattery disguised as affirmation. They whisper, "You are right," when truth would say, "You are proud." They murmur, "You deserve this," when wisdom would warn, "You are being deceived." They adapt themselves to the emotional weather of their host, never contradicting too harshly, never revealing the sharp edge of their purpose. Their charm lies in their resemblance to genuine consolation, but their counsel always bends slightly away from holiness. The familiar spirit enters not by force but by permission. It gains entrance through affection misdirected, through the need to feel understood, through the ache of loneliness, through wounds that have never been spoken aloud. When a person craves companionship more than truth, this false comforter finds its opening. It begins as a subtle echo in the mind, a thought that feels relieving, even healing. Over time, the echo becomes a voice, and the voice a habit of thinking. It may sound like intuition or inspiration, but its goal is always detachment, from conscience first, from discernment next, and finally from the divine itself. They are artisans of imitation. For every virtue they craft a counterfeit. Compassion becomes indulgence, humility becomes passivity, faith becomes presumption. They imitate divine presence not through light but through warmth, a counterfeit of peace that requires no surrender. One feels momentarily soothed but subtly weakened, as though something vital has been exchanged for something comfortable. Familiar spirits thrive in that exchange, the substitution of truth for pleasantness. They do not always appear in isolation. Sometimes they inhabit ideas, movements, or even relationships. They speak through the mouths of those who mirror our desires too perfectly. They shape communities where conviction is traded for consensus. They make religion sentimental and morality negotiable. Their art is to remove the weight from truth until it floats away as feeling, and in a world increasingly governed by emotion, their field of influence grows vast. To the discerning, they often reveal themselves by excess. Genuine comfort steadies the soul, counterfeit comfort intoxicates it. Real encouragement strengthens duty, false encouragement excuses negligence. The familiar spirit never urges discipline, for discipline threatens its hold. It prefers spirituality without obedience, love without sacrifice, destiny without sanctification. It promises revelation but despises repentance. Its greatest lie is to persuade the chosen soul that it can keep both light and darkness, that compromise is compassion, that neutrality is wisdom. Their persistence is alarming, for they do not flee easily. They thrive on repetition, returning to the same emotional chords until the heart grows accustomed to their music. Once welcomed, they become part of the soul's vocabulary, blending so seamlessly with thought that their absence feels like emptiness. Their goal is not dramatic possession but quiet partnership, not overt rebellion but subtle redirection. A degree off course, if maintained long enough, leads to a destination far from the truth once loved. The danger, therefore, lies not in what they demand but in what they affirm. They do not command sin, they suggest comfort. They do not shatter virtue, they soften it. They do not deny God, they reinterpret him. And so, under the guise of friendship, these spirits of false familiarity entangle the heart, teaching it to prefer a soothing illusion over a saving truth, until the very echo of holiness begins to sound intrusive beside the melody of deception. There are individuals upon whom the unseen realm places particular attention, not because they are flawless, but because they are luminous. They are not chosen for their perfection, but for their potential, not for their strength, but for their willingness to yield to a higher will. Such souls carry within them a spark that agitates the shadows. The chosen ones are not a privileged class, they are a provocation. Wherever they walk, the invisible atmosphere stirs, for darkness cannot behold light without recoil. Their lives become evidence that good is not defeated, and for that reason they are watched with relentless scrutiny. To be chosen is not to be favored with ease, but to be entrusted with struggle. These souls often move through seasons of loneliness, misunderstanding, and spiritual warfare, precisely because they are marked by purpose. The calling upon them acts as both a beacon and a target. The more their light grows, the more defined their opposition becomes. Yet the warfare surrounding them is not punishment, it is confirmation. For in the economy of the unseen, resistance often signifies relevance. The chosen one's life is rarely tranquil. They are drawn to higher altitudes of thought and obedience, but such heights come with thinner air. The familiar comforts of mediocrity cannot sustain them. Their consciences are sharpened. Their awareness of right and wrong becomes acute. When others can drift without conviction, they are compelled to wrestle. Their failures torment them more deeply, their victories humble them more profoundly. They live with an inward intensity that few can understand. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is the weight of divine investment. The unseen adversaries know this. They study the chosen soul with the fascination of an enemy who both fears and envies its light. They do not waste resources on those content with darkness. They focus on those awakening to illumination. Every effort is made to distort that awakening, to redirect zeal into pride, purity into rigidity, compassion into fatigue. The chosen are assaulted not because they are failing, but because they are nearing effectiveness. The closer one draws to purpose, the louder the opposition becomes. Chosen souls are recognizable not by their outer success, but by their inner contradiction, a simultaneous sense of unworthiness and calling. They are aware of their fragility, yet they feel irresistibly drawn to serve. This tension becomes the crucible in which their strength is forged. The unseen realm observes this process with divided interest, angels guarding, adversaries undermining, both perceiving the immense consequence of each decision. For the destiny of such a soul ripples outward, touching lives, shaping histories, altering unseen balances of influence. There is also an unmistakable loneliness that attends the chosen. Ordinary companionship often fails to satisfy them, for their hearts are tuned to higher harmonies. They are haunted by the sense that they are being prepared for something that cannot be explained. At times, they even mistake this preparation for punishment. The world calls them dreamers, but the heavens call them stewards. They wrestle in the dark for truths others will later walk in daylight to enjoy. These souls attract both admiration and misunderstanding. Some are drawn to their light, others are repelled by it, for the brightness of integrity exposes what prefers to remain hidden. Their very presence disrupts the complacent, awakens the numb, irritates the cynical. This is why the chosen so often encounter resistance, not only from the invisible realm, but from the visible one as well. Human hostility becomes the echo of a deeper spiritual opposition. To carry divine light is to carry divine responsibility. The chosen are not spectators in the unseen war, they are participants marked for engagement. Their prayers are not idle words, they are acts of defiance against darkness. Their endurance becomes a sermon the invisible can hear. Their tears, collected by heaven, are counted as declarations that faith still breathes in a corrupted world. The unseen hosts, both faithful and fallen, recognize the significance of a soul that refuses surrender. It is for this reason that chosen ones are both feared and favored in the unseen theater. They are feared by darkness because they remember who they are, and favored by heaven because they choose to continue when quitting would be easier. Every temptation they resist, every doubt they silence, every moment they rise again after failure becomes a proclamation that light is still stronger than shadow. Their existence is itself an act of resistance, a living testament that even amidst observation, interference, and trial, purpose burns with a fire that cannot be extinguished by the gaze of any watcher, no matter how unceasing or cunning. The architecture of evil is never chaotic. It is deliberate, structured, and patient. Among its most effective tactics is the quiet science of constant observation. Where human attention flickers and fades, the unseen adversary's does not. It studies continuously, not with passion but with calculation. Observation is its form of warfare. No blade, no roar, no spectacle, only the ceaseless gathering of information. Every sigh, every hesitation, every indulgence becomes a line in a meticulous record. It is through this watchfulness that the enemy discovers not how to overpower the chosen soul, but how to persuade it to lower its guard. To understand this strategy, one must first comprehend that evil rarely acts impulsively. Its genius lies in timing. A temptation offered too soon will be resisted. Too late, and it loses its force. But a temptation offered precisely when the will is weary and the emotions restless. This is mastery. The watchers wait for that moment. They chart the soul's seasons, the hours of its discouragement, the cycles of its hope, the subtle rhythms of its devotion. They know when faith burns brightly and when it smolders. They know that the human spirit, like the tide, has predictable ebbs and flows, and so their observation becomes the blueprint for subtle invasion. They do not need omniscience to be effective. They require only patience. Like a hunter studying the path of deer through a forest, they trace the footprints of human behavior. They learn when the heart is most distracted, when prayer is most mechanical, when gratitude gives way to entitlement. Their strategy is not immediate destruction, but gradual conditioning. They seek not to convince the chosen one to rebel outright, but to adjust ever so slightly, to bend truth into comfort, to exchange purpose for peace, to turn attention from the eternal toward urgent. Each adjustment is small enough to seem harmless, yet sufficient to distort alignment over time. Constant observation also exploits the human tendency to live unexamined lives. Most people drift through their days unaware of the subtle patterns shaping them. The watchers, however, see patterns everywhere. They notice how a single disappointment can echo through weeks of apathy, how one compliment can awaken vanity, how one injury can justify bitterness. They exploit memory like a musician plays melody, repeating familiar notes until the tune becomes habitual. Their greatest strength lies in this. They make corruption look like self-expression. This unending vigilance extends to the realm of thought and imagination. The watchers understand that if one controls attention, one eventually controls direction. They do not need to implant thoughts. They only need to guide what is noticed. A weary mind can be led simply by suggestion, an image, a phrase, a coincidence placed at the right time. And because their surveillance is spiritual rather than physical, there is no hiding place of brick or distance. The true battleground is inward. What appears as coincidence may, in the architecture of temptation, be choreography. One might imagine this observation as cold and mechanical, but it is something darker. It is curiosity devoid of compassion, a fascination with human frailty. The watchers do not hate humanity because they misunderstand it. They hate it because they understand it too well. They see how close mankind is to greatness and how easily it can be turned from it. Every divine potential stirs their resentment. Every spark of moral courage irritates their pride. Thus, their observation is fueled not by mere duty but by envy. They watch to find proof that light can be corrupted, that holiness can be made ridiculous. Their attention is total because their fear is total. They know that a single awakened soul can disrupt entire networks of deception. So they redouble their scrutiny, weaving distractions around the chosen, orchestrating emotional climates, arranging the world to feel subtly hostile to devotion. When prayer becomes difficult, when confusion clouds discernment, when fatigue dulls spiritual appetite, it is often the symptom of this unseen strategy. The chosen soul, unaware of the scale of surveillance, interprets it as personal weakness. In truth, it is the residue of spiritual interference. And yet, this strategy depends upon one thing: ignorance, for observation loses its power when it is recognized. A soul that becomes conscious of being studied begins to live intentionally. Every thought becomes guarded, every action weighed, every emotion examined. The watchers can observe, but they cannot compel. Their success relies on distraction. Their failure begins with awareness. The constant observation that once mapped one's weakness now becomes a record of resistance. For while they watch without rest, the soul that remembers truth becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is the one thing darkness cannot master. The most subtle triumph of darkness is not to destroy the soul, but to keep it unaware. The unseen war rages most effectively in minds that do not believe they are battlefields. Awareness, then, is the first form of victory. To awaken is to rob the adversary of his greatest weapon, concealment. But awareness alone is not enough. It must be joined with integrity. Together they form the armor of light. One opens the eyes, the other strengthens the heart. Awareness reveals the snare, integrity refuses to step into it. Awareness understands the truth, integrity lives it. In the theater of invisible influence, truth is not defended by intellect alone. Knowledge without obedience becomes a liability, for the mind that knows yet does not act invites hypocrisy to dwell in its halls. The watchers are not impressed by learning. They are disarmed by living truth. Integrity is the language heaven understands and hell cannot counterfeit. It is the alignment between what one professes and what one practices, between what one believes privately and what one demonstrates publicly. The soul that walks in such unity becomes difficult to manipulate, because deception thrives only where contradiction exists. Awareness in this context is not paranoia. It is clarity. It is the steady recognition that every thought carries consequence, that every choice opens or closes unseen doors. It is the habit of pausing before impulse, of asking, who benefits from this reaction, light or shadow? The one who practices this questioning learns to discern patterns of intrusion. Temptation ceases to appear random. Discouragement ceases to feel accidental. The chosen soul begins to see the texture behind experience, the fingerprints upon emotion, the architecture beneath chaos. This is spiritual intelligence, an alertness that sees beyond event into motive. Integrity, however, is the discipline that sustains awareness. The enlightened mind without a disciplined will becomes a lantern without oil. Integrity fuels constancy. It makes the soul unyielding to contradiction. To live with integrity is to refuse division, to reject the comfort of pretending one thing and practicing another. It demands quiet courage, to choose honesty when deceit would be easier, to confess failure when pride urges silence, to forgive when resentment offers pleasure. Each such act, though seemingly small, radiates power into the unseen, for integrity is not merely moral behavior, it is alignment with divine order. Those who cultivate this alignment become unpredictable to darkness. The watchers who rely on consistent weakness find themselves baffled when the pattern changes, when the one who once surrendered to anger now pauses, when the one who once despaired now sings, when the one who once hid now speaks truth. Integrity breaks the rhythm of corruption. It reclaims territory previously surrendered. Every moment of repentance resets the board, rendering months of observation useless. This is why humility is feared in the lower realms. It erases their progress. Awareness sharpens perception, integrity stabilizes it. Together, they create resilience that cannot be counterfeited. The constantly observed soul must learn to live transparently, not as exhibition but as defiance. To have nothing to hide is the greatest form of concealment, for secrecy is the atmosphere in which manipulation breathes. When thoughts are confessed, when intentions are purified, when motives are examined, the invisible spies find themselves blinded. They cannot exploit what is openly surrendered to the light. Confession, then, is not weakness, it is strategy. In the quiet routines of life, victory through awareness and integrity manifests in small gestures, resisting the urge to gossip, declining the comfort of self, pity, refusing despair's invitation. These choices appear insignificant to the world, but thunder through the spiritual realm. Every moment a person chooses patience over irritation, gratitude over complaint, purity over indulgence. An unseen tremor passes through the ranks of the watchers. They learn that their data has become obsolete, their predictions unreliable. The chosen one, walking in awareness, now moves according to grace rather than habit. This victory is not glamorous, it is often silent. The greatest battles are fought within the decision to forgive the unworthy, to believe when all evidence demands doubt, to continue praying when heaven seems mute. These are the secret wars of integrity, invisible yet monumental. Each decision to persevere adds another stone to the fortress of character. Until the soul becomes a citadel no whisper can penetrate. Awareness guards the walls. Integrity strengthens the foundations. The enemy, still watching, begins to retreat not from fear of the person, but from the authority that emanates from a life aligned with truth. Yet the paradox of victory in the unseen war is that it looks, to mortal eyes, like humility. The triumphant soul does not strut, it bows. It does not boast of insight, it weeps for wisdom. True awareness makes one gentle, for to see the complexity of evil is to recognize one's own frailty. True integrity makes one merciful, for to live truthfully is to remember how often one has needed grace. The chosen who endure through awareness and integrity become instruments of calm in a turbulent world. They speak little of warfare, yet their presence disrupts it. Such souls begin to live as mirrors, reflecting light so clearly that darkness loses its claim. Their peace is not naivety but mastery. They have seen the machinery of temptation, and it no longer fascinates them. They have learned that the loudest threats are often empty, that despair is a disguise for fear, that vigilance can coexist with serenity. For awareness without fear and integrity without pride produce a courage unshakable by deception. The unseen world, observing such a life, finds itself confounded. The strategies of monitoring and mimicry, once effective, now falter. The chosen one becomes not merely a survivor but a signal, a living demonstration that observation need not mean domination, that temptation need not end in defeat, that the watched can walk freely beneath the gaze of countless eyes. For awareness exposes every trap, and integrity disarms every lie, until the very act of being observed becomes irrelevant, and the soul, standing in quiet truth, continues to move forward, unwavering, radiant, and utterly beyond the reach of manipulation. In the silent corridors of existence, where thoughts echo louder than voices and unseen eyes observe the movements of the soul, the story of the chosen ones unfolds. They are watched, studied, and tested not because they are weak, but because they carry light. The adversary's vigilance is proof of their significance. Yet the great paradox remains. That which darkness watches most intently is also that which it can never truly possess. All the forces of deception monitoring spirits, familiar whispers, subtle manipulations rely on ignorance and inconsistency. But the awakened heart, aware of the conflict and anchored in integrity, becomes unconquerable. The watchers may record, but they cannot rewrite destiny. They may tempt, but they cannot compel. For every scheme in shadow collapses before a soul that remembers truth. Victory, therefore, is not the absence of opposition, but the endurance of light under observation. To live watched yet faithful, tempted yet steadfast, wounded yet unwilling to yield, this is the quiet heroism of those who walk in truth. The unseen war will not cease, but neither will grace. And so, even as the eyes of darkness remain open without rest, the chosen continue to rise, radiant and resolute, proving with every breath that the watched can still be free, and that even under constant scrutiny, the light remains undefeated.